Dennis?
Close enough.
Okay. Well, I can't say Honobia that way either. So. He's with North American Bigfoot Search. They're a professional Bigfoot research group. And he's been kind enough to come and do a presentation for us, so I'm going to turn it over to him. And there's the infamous controller.
Tell me what you do here. Basically, whenever you get ready for the next slide,
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. A little bit about the organization is several years ago when I was working in technology in Silicon Valley, there were a group of other executives that I worked with that had incidents in the woods that were baffling to them. And these are very, very intelligent people that are fairly wealthy as well. And I was working and leading an HR group in the organization, and I knew that I was leaving, and they approached me and they said, Dave, we know that you have 20 years of law enforcement experience, we know you're a professional, you know you have a high level of integrity and credibility, we want you to lead an organization and find out some answers for us about Bigfoot. And that's really the origins of North American Bigfoot. We're centered in Northern California in the San Jose area, and privately funded. Earlier this year, we bought the research from an individual named Ray Crow. Ray Crow was in Oregon. He'd been doing it for about 25 years, and he produced something called the Track Record. Track Record was a monthly newsletter, and I would say that there was more information in those decades of newsletters than I've ever seen anywhere, any place, ever. And if you read them line by line, I have probably learned more from those documents than anywhere else, including the woods. In one of those documents, a couple months back, was this quote from Lee Trippett. Lee was one of the first Bigfoot researchers in the 1950s, 60s, and into the 70s. And he made a presentation one day in front of a group of academic people, and he was ridiculed to no end. And Lee came back and wrote an article about it, and this is the last sentence in the article. And I leave that here because people like Dr. Meldrum and others, every once in a while you get questioned about your integrity and your credibility when you're doing a speech like this in front of some people. And I want to say that it's a challenge to me, and I'm sure it's a challenge to Dr. Meldrum at times, to deal with this on an ongoing basis. But if you believe in the cause, it's all good.
Trigger.
Oh well, somebody ruined it for me. So before we started our research, we took a very calculated approach to this. First of all, for the first 3 years we existed, we didn't make any public appearances. We kept our mouths shut, our eyes opened. We attended a few conferences, sat in the back of the room. We studied the Bigfoot arena. Who's doing what, where, and how. Who are the credible people, who are not. And then we mapped every Bigfoot sighting from 1848 till 2007 on a map that we had in our office all over the entire western U.S. And we slowly worked it down to an area of Northern California, a 4-county area of Siskiyou, Delaware, Humboldt, and Trinity counties. Slowly we worked it down from that into an area called Hoopa. Hoopa is the largest reservation, Native American reservation in California. Approximately 144 square miles. This map we licensed from California AAA, and this is part of the 4-county map that we plotted. The interesting part of this map, and it's in the book at the back, the publisher couldn't put it in the book because the detail's too small. And we wanted a map large enough that we could identify mountains, streams, rivers, creeks. And there's a couple interesting parts of this. The 4-county map that we included has 350 locations where there's Bigfoot sightings and encounters on the map. On the back side of the map is a 1 or 2 line description of what happened at that location. And then every incident that we investigated in our book is on this map. Now, one of the things that many researchers don't do that we do is we hold the witnesses accountable for what they're saying. And by what I mean by that is that after I sit down with somebody and I listen to their story, I put pen to paper and I write it up in the form of an affidavit. I put that in front of the witness and I said, if there's any corrections, correct it, but I want a factual account of what occurred. And then if they won't sign the affidavit, we don't investigate the sighting. If they sign the affidavit, we move forward with the process. So, the area of Honobia is about 25 miles south of Bluff Creek. Everyone knows where Bluff Creek is. 1967 footage, famous, and almost for everybody, that is the face of Bigfoot. In our view, that is a very small, minute percentage of what Bigfoot sightings actually look like. And I'll explain that more as we move on. But this creature, do we believe it's a real creature? Yes. Do we believe that that is a Bigfoot? Yes. But in our studies, the people that are viewing the creature in Northern California and Oregon, Oklahoma, Minnesota, this isn't the perspective of what is actually occurring. It's close. So how we got to Honobia? That's our website, bigfootsearch.com, affidavits, the reservation, Bluff Creek, locating witnesses. We do something that I don't think many others do, and that is when a sighting occurs in a specific area, we'll take that incident and we'll move it forward just like it's a law enforcement investigation. So if you have a crime in a neighborhood, what do? You go out and you knock on doors. And the funny thing is that this week we were in western Oklahoma doing some sightings, and we knocked on some doors in some of the most rural areas you can imagine. And I'm talking about a farm site with probably a couple thousand acres, and I was knocking on the farmer's door. And if you're unwilling to do that, you're unwilling to find out really what's occurring in that neighborhood, it's hard to understand the total phenomenon. I'm not afraid to embarrass myself. If somebody laughs at me, that's okay, but we're going to do it. And it's actually reaped a lot of results. And then we'll document it, forensic sketches. We'll talk about this more in a second here. Oh, how do you go back? So one of the ways we cordon down that area of what we're looking at is we looked at precipitation. For the people that weren't here yesterday, Dr. Meldrum talked about an area in China where the Yeren was located. And he talked about the precipitation in that area was near 50 inches a year. Well, it just so happens that that dark blue area right here on the map is 50 inches a year or more. And that is the area in the western U.S. where Bigfoot proliferates. And you notice that there's a tiny corner of northwest California that has that same level of precipitation. Just coincidentally, that's the highest amount of Bigfoot sightings. So when we looked at this map and we put that as an overlay on our sightings plot map, some things started to appear that was plausible. Now, I'm not saying in the farthest reaches of your mind that Bigfoot sightings don't occur in almost every county in California, Oregon, and Washington. But the greatest amounts occur where there's the greatest amounts of precipitation. The other point was all of the sightings on the map in the back include an elevation. So we tried to take as many variables as we could and put them into a database and see what crosses, what intersects, and what makes sense. Communication with witnesses is a key ingredient. When I came out here to Oklahoma, nobody had ever heard of us, essentially. And most people don't really know about Bigfoot organizations who aren't looking into Bigfoot. They don't quite understand where they're supposed to report this to. So when we first need a witness, say I walk up to a farmhouse, I knock on the door, and I leave them a card, I want them to be able to go to our database and see and understand exactly what we're doing. Web presence was important. There's a sighting report there. We keep up a blog. We have reviews of our books and other books in the back of the room. It's an avenue for our press releases, and it's a real retail storefront. I'll get to that. When we bought Ray Crow's research, it included a bookstore and a lot of novelty items that were still moving out. And our idea was never to be a novelty store, and that will soon be over. But we do sell the books and some other things through it. But the novelty items are almost gone. Affidavits. It was our idea to hold the witnesses accountable for their statements and to be a permanent document as we move forward. No other group had done this. The witnesses, at that point, when we put the affidavit in front of them, all of a sudden started to take things a little more seriously, which is good. We want them to think hard and go back on their mind and ensure that what they're saying is accurate. Only sightings require an affidavit, because if somebody comes up and tells me, I heard a whoop, whoop, whoop last night. Okay, that's pretty credible. I can believe that. Where did you hear it? We'll go into that. But if they wanted to fabricate something, they might as well fabricate a sighting. If they're holding it to the whoop, 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 and they're not telling me about a sighting, it's believable. So it's only sightings that we're holding people under the affidavit rule. The Hoopa Reservation, established under a U.S. Act in 1864, it's exactly 45 miles east of Eureka. Eureka sits on the coast of California. The reservation straddles the Trinity River. Trinity flows into the Klamath River, one of the biggest rivers in California. The Trinity is famous for very large runs of steelhead and salmon. It has heavy fishing during the winter and summer months. It's a recreational spot where people float down the river during the summer. It's absolutely gorgeous. Just so happens that Hoopa has their own wildlife division inside the tribe, which are a great resource to us. And they keep track of their bear very, very well. Many of them have collars. There are more bear per square mile in Hoopa than any place else in the western United States, just by coincidence. Bluff Creek, I won't talk much about it, but it is the center of a sacred area to the Hoopa, the Yurok, and the Kurok. Has sightings and footprints going back 200 years. I've personally been into that area at least 50 times. Quickly talk to you about an area just above Bluff Creek called Onion Lake. Onion Lake is maybe 500 feet above Bluff Creek. It sits on a ridge line. It's a very beautiful spot. There's no fish in the lake, but this area has a history of Bigfoot sightings and incidents. And just like every other researcher, you always question things when you go in there. I've probably been to Onion Lake 25 times. One time I've been to Onion Lake where I had probably one of the strangest occurrences that ever has happened to myself and a fellow researcher. In that area around Onion Lake, there's no way to get it into deep portions of it without walking. And so one day we packed up and we just took off walking at 6:30 a.m. and we didn't get back until about 7 p.m. In the middle of that walk around the backside of the lake, very strange sensation. We stopped and we both looked at each other and we knew what was occurring. There was absolutely dead silence. And we looked up to the top of the Douglas fir there. They're 200, 250 feet up. And they're kind of blowing in the wind. But there's no crickets, there's no frogs, there's no animals, there's no leaves. There was a complete vacuum of sound. So we each sat down on opposite sides of that Douglas fir for the next hour and tried to see what our senses could gather. That went on for about 2 hours. And I don't have a real explanation to what happened, but it was very odd. A great person that I want everyone to remember is a guy named Al Hodgson. Al lives in Willow Creek, and he was around back in the times when Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin had their sightings. He's an excellent resource, a very humble man, very careful with his words. He owned a sort of a hardware store in Willow Creek during that time, and he remembers meeting Patterson and Gimlin on the day that they took the footage. He knows a lot of the characters in the area, and he has a lot of experiences that he could share about where to go, where not to go, who to trust. We'll talk more about Al in a little bit.
Whoa. I don't have quick time. Let's see.
This is good, right? So the Honobia people in that reservation, they're very careful. A lot of researchers have gone into that area over time. A lot of documentary people have gone in, and they've essentially gone in and treated them very wrong. The first 6 months I was there, a few people would talk to me, but it slowly started to get better. They started to see that I was going to be there for the long haul. They started to trust started to be there. People in the community started to say I was a decent sort. They could talk to me. And slowly it started to evolve. I also started a relationship right from the beginning with the tribal police there. Many of them knew where I was from. They were from areas nearby. They knew the history. They knew the elders. Tony Hacking was the U.S. Forest Service biologist for the Bluff Creek Koopa area. Tony was the one biologist from the Forest Service I've ever met that will talk to me about Bigfoot. Tony didn't totally believe in it, but he kept an open mind enough where he could talk at an educated level about it and help me find certain avenues of research that was needed. Tony actually did a documentary on Bigfoot for the Travel Channel. And when you see it, I want you to think how much of a risk that gentleman took. As is one of the most unfortunate turns I've ever had. I was with Tony for 2 years. He got brain cancer and he died last year. He was a very young man. He was only 48 years old. And they haven't replaced Tony in that region of Bluff Creek yet. Next. 2 different types of sightings in our mind. There's a distant sighting and there's a close sighting. Close sighting is close enough where you can tell facial identity of the creature. A distant sighting, 200 yards, you see a creature, biped, running at a distance. Facial identification to us is one of the key ingredients. And the reason being is that when you identify somebody in society, we usually identify them first by the face. Well, we want to think of Bigfoot that same way for a variety of reasons. If you notice in the back of the room, there's a lot of titles saying the Great Apes of North America. Well, when we started into this, we didn't know what we're dealing with. And part of our process at this early stage still that we're in is in attempting to understand exactly what we're dealing with. When you see a creature at 200 yards, you are not going to be able to tell what the face of that creature is. But a vast majority of sightings are at 50 yards or more, and you can't see the face. And at 50 yards or more, that thing will look more like an animal than it does like a human. Now, there's multiple witnesses to some sightings, which are excellent. Physical evidence in association with the sighting is even better. As we all know in the room here, there's a lot of researchers in the past that have made big promises. And few have ever come to your doorstep and delivered. What we're going to do, and our doctrine from the very beginning, is to promise small and deliver big. So I'm not going to promise you a lot, but I will tell you that there are some great things on the horizon with this. With those bad promises and failure to deliver, people in society have gotten a little reticent to give us information at times. They're a little hesitant because they don't know what we're going to do with that information. And that's understandable. Next. Canvassing we talked about. One thing that I think you'll find with everyone from our organization is that we're open to every aspect of Bigfoot. I'm not going to tell you to walk away if you tell me some strange story that you've had. I'm going to listen to everything. And it goes back to what Lee Trippett said in that first statement. If you start to close your mind off, and you don't keep an open mind to all facets of it, there's something you're going to miss down the line. And that's already happened to me by keeping that open mind and listening to everyone. I've learned a lot that I never knew. Allow witnesses to tell the story. We always ask to be taken to the location because every location I've been taken to, I've learned something. Why the creature was there. What was it doing there? Was it passing through or was it trying to make it home? Was it eating something in the region that we don't understand? The topography, trying to locate second witnesses, elevation, ridges, rivers, all important. Every time there's a sighting, we pull a USGS map from that region just because they're the most comprehensive with their information. Next. Now, everyone listen real carefully. I'm only going to reference this to Northern California. In the back of the room, in the book, there's the map insert. That map has all the elevations for 350 sightings. In Northern California, Southern Oregon area, the key point to us is 1,600 to 3,200 feet, with 2,400 feet being the optimal point of reference for a sighting. It just so happens, and this is just a complete fluke, the Bluff Creek sighting was exactly 2,400 feet. 2,400 feet in that area is just about snowline, too. Now, we're not exactly certain why that 1,600 to 3,200 area comes into play so often because there's food source much lower, food source much higher, but 2,400 comes up very often. Berries, everyone can understand that. Mushrooms, believe it or not, there's some great mushrooms that grow in the area of Hoopa that the reservation people feed off of all year, right? And they're outstanding. And the Bigfoot eat them. Females 13 to 30. There's a lot of sightings in California that have happened while people are camping in an everyday campground. Not way off in a wilderness area, just in a campground next to a highway. Many of these sightings have happened when one female is camping. And when the sightings occur, 90% is when there is at least one female in that tent. If we can get to them through the research process, this is a very sensitive area that you have to be a professional about, talking to the people about it, the month, the year, what happened, what occurred. You get to the point and you try to be the good researcher and cover all areas of the topic. And if you get to that point of asking the female if she was menstruating at the time, 90% of that time the answer is yes. What does that tell us? Bigfoot has an incredible sense of smell. Chances are that Bigfoot that came into that campground was a male. Children. We've taken several sightings where just children were involved. Somewhere, children observed a Bigfoot and called their parent out onto the porch to witness it. Harvey Pratt, who's from the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation and is the only sketch artist in Oklahoma who's been doing it for 40 years, came out to California and he sketched the juvenile Bigfoot that the kids saw. First time that I have ever known that we have documentation of an adolescent Bigfoot like that. Kids pose no threat to Bigfoot. Kids, I think, bring an innocence that Bigfoot understands. And the other part of that is that younger children may give off a completely different odor than we give off as adults. And that odor may be the association. Babies crying, we think, are a huge attractant to Bigfoot. And we don't understand that yet. It might be the smell. We're not sure. It may be that their own young cry in the same manner. We don't know. But when a baby's crying and you make it loud enough in a field, that's a very good chance that if there's a Bigfoot in the area, it's going to come to investigate. I've personally taken several reports where people had a baby crying in a house and the Bigfoot came to the window of the house and either looked in or knocked at the window. Precipitation, we talked about 50 inches. There is a direct correlation between bears and Bigfoot. It's probably food source. Best I can tell, Bigfoot don't hunt bear. Bear don't hunt Bigfoot. They live in harmony with each other. Hoopa has the highest concentration of bear per square mile than anywhere I've ever seen. And they do that through their tracking methods. The area of Northern California has a huge amount of bear in Humboldt, Trinity, Del Norte counties. Huge. Just so happens there's a huge population of Bigfoot sightings. Now what I talk about in my book, because some novices that really don't know a lot about Bigfoot, that people say, well, people are mistaking Bigfoot for a bear. It's really a bear. People are seeing a lot of bear out there in Northern California, so they're really seeing a bear. And I explain to people that I've taken a lot of police reports in my day. I take a lot of bank robbery reports. When somebody rolls into a bank in a wheelchair and robs the bank in a wheelchair, I don't think they're going to describe Carl Lewis running into the bank and robbing the bank and running out. I think people don't give witnesses enough credibility and enough integrity to understand exactly what they're saying. So it's easy to slough it off and say, oh, it's really a bear. But bear don't run on 2 feet. Native Americans I'll talk about more in a minute. Next. Harvey Pratt, Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation Assistant Director. He went to the FBI Leadership Academy. He's a Cheyenne Arapaho Native American. Next. Harvey was found through a nationwide search we did for the best forensic artist we could find. A law enforcement forensic artist sits down with a victim or a witness and draws a sketch of the suspect who committed the crime. I've seen the pictures of the people that they apprehend later for that crime. It looks like identical to what Harvey has drawn. Just to tell you guys a quick story relevant to this location here, an individual here had a sighting, a close encounter. Last night, Harvey, myself, Dr. Meldred witnessed it. Harvey sat down with the individual and drew the sketch of what the person saw. At the end of it, I asked the person, how accurate is the drawing he just did? He said, that's a 10 out of 10. So do I have a comfort level in what Harvey's drawing is what these people are seeing? Absolutely. In this incident here, and I'm only going to talk about one that's in the book, but to me it's one of the most compelling incidents. Raven is a woman that lives on the edge of the forest line in a very small community area of Hoopa, very similar to this. She stored her garbage in a small garbage bin on the side of her property. At 11:30 one night, she hears a loud noise near the garbage, and the motion light above her garage door goes off. Raven walks downstairs with her phone in one hand and walks outside and looks and sees somebody leaning over the side of the tin, grabbing garbage bags. So Raven hits 911 and calls, and her brother-in-law is on duty as a police officer and says, hey, there's a prowler here. So all she can see is a dark-colored coat she makes leaning over the tin and 2 arms going through her white bags of garbage. She described it as 7 to 8 feet tall, 500 to 600 pounds. And how this description evolved is that she's there on the phone, Hoopa's responding to officers, and the thing stands up and looks at her. She says, Dave, it looked much more human than animal. And it looked and acted like a man in its body and its form. It had hair over its entire body, and it appeared to know exactly what it was going after in the garbage, because it would push certain bags away and grab other bags. Next. Here's a sketch of what Harvey drew. Raven came in and said that was an identical match to what she saw. She said it had very little hair on the face. This area was almost completely clear. She described it as a very mature male. Almost had like a beard growth around the chin on the side of the face here. It had long flowing hair off the back. And it had an eyes, a nose, and a mouth very similar to a human. She said, if I looked at it, could have been a human. Next. The creature turned, grabbed a bag in each hand, and walked to the woods. This is her description of the back end. Massive, 7 feet tall, at least 500, 600 pounds, hair over its entire body. She just said, in her words, it had no neck. It was like the head was attached to the top of the body. Very non-aggressive, long hair off the back of the head. We hear that all the time from Northern California. Very, very muscular. She said you can see the muscles in the back of the buttocks. Next. What's the relevance here to Oklahoma? Well, I'm trying to tie this all in. This is an article that came out Ray Crow's newsletter in January of 2000. And what I'm keying on here is a description that the witness said. The tall, hairy creatures resemble a man more than a typical ape. This is an individual that had a sighting right here, very close. And that's the same sort of things we hear on a regular basis. And if you look at this, one creature stared through a window of the family room staring at his 3-year-old daughter. It's that kid's connection again. Next. Again, a sighting coming in about 4 or 5 years ago. This is an interesting one. It talks about a lot of different facets. Berries, urine smell. And part here, only the lower half of the hairy animal was walking upright. Person smelled like an old nursing home. Feet tall, dark reddish brown. Dark reddish brown hair except on the face and the chest. And what we attribute the chest to is the Patterson-Gimlin film. There was only a 3rd generation of that film released to the public. And we've never seen the 1st generation. But when you take off a lot of the filters that were put on that film, and you can see the film in its closest to original reference, the back of the creature and the front of the creature, you can see skin right through the hair. It's not very dark. It's not real thick. So what we're thinking here is that the people probably saw skin directly through the hair, and it appeared almost as though it didn't have hair. But no facial hair, very common thread that we hear. Next. I just spent the entire week here in Oklahoma working with Harvey. We contacted witnesses near and far from reservations. Witnesses having close encounters during the daylight hours. One gentleman we met said, I used to carry a gun and I was going to hunt one down and shoot one to prove that they exist. Until I actually saw one. And I saw how human they were. And there's no way in the world I'm ever going to shoot one. They look like us. Facial sketches we did this week look much more human than animal. The sketch of an Oklahoma Bigfoot that we've done, and we've done several this week, contain those same human facial quantities as we've encountered in other western U.S. locations. Personally, I've been to Minnesota, and so's Harvey, and we've talked to people in Minnesota, and it's the same sort of story. Again, I'll go back that years ago, when there wasn't as good a communication tool as there is today. When somebody saw a Bigfoot 100, 200 yards away, again, they have that animal-looking quality and appearance. You get closer, and from here up, that all starts to change. Next. So next steps for us. Hancock House is our publisher. They already asked us for a 2nd book, and that's just about ready to go. We use forensic sketches in the 2nd book. There's a historical perspective on that. A lot of people said, well, this is a new phenomenon and it hasn't been occurring for a long time. Well, we went back and our researchers went all the way back to 1848. And we found stories written in newspapers about encounters people had. Now, you won't see the word Bigfoot before 1958, but you will hear wild man, hairy man, wild creature. The consistencies, 2 feet, hair over the entire body. 90% of them say no facial hair. A current theme. Now, I'll stop right here just for a second and say, there's been a very unusual occurrence to us between Native Americans and Bigfoot. And yes, we cordoned down our research and we ended up in Hoopa for a very specific reason. That reason being is that there's more Bigfoot sightings there than any place else in the western U.S. Well, let's stop there for a minute. Harvey and I met with a group of people and they saw that creature on Hoopa, but they weren't all Hoopa Native Americans. One of the people that Harvey drew a sketch for was the retail manager for the store in Hoopa that was driving to work at 3 in the morning and saw the creature in the road. So when people say, well, it's only Native Americans that see this, that's not true. everybody who frequents that area, different people have seen it. Now, since we've been to Oklahoma, it's been fascinating. Many Native Americans are seeing this creature. So keep an open mind about this for a second and try to understand why those people may be seeing it more than Caucasian people. Well, maybe they're in that area more. Maybe the creature has a comfort level with Native Americans that it doesn't have with us, me, Caucasian. So we took a lot of these things and we fed it to our team and we said, hey, let's look at this carefully and try to understand. And we are getting close to having a better understanding about this, and it'll probably be laid out in that second book. And I will say that there appears to be a direct relationship about why Native Americans see it more than us. And it's not that their eyesight's better, trust me. There's a rational reason with an easy explanation that we're getting to. And it's not to be discounted. Next. One more thing about the map. No other group has ever put together as concise a map as what we put together in that area. And I've had probably 30 people come to me since we released this a month ago and say, hey, it's fun to sit down and look at that map and try to draw correlations behind why those sightings are in those places. 4 counties, it's a big area of California. You lay that map out, you're going to see the topography, the area, and you're going to see some consistencies. One consistency to that map is that 90% of all the sightings on the map are within 10 miles of a major river. And there is a key point that I think will be consistent in many witness sightings across the United States. And when Harvey and I traveled across Oklahoma this last week, that consistently stayed together as many of the sightings are extremely close to rivers and creeks that flow year-round. There's a reason for that. Next. We're going to be at the Texas Bigfoot Conference in a couple weeks. Hope you guys might be there. But REI is one of the biggest outdoor stores in the United States. And I always say this to every group. If you're not a member of REI and you live near one, please do. We are the first Bigfoot group anywhere that's been signed by REI to be in their lecture series in their stores. And I'll be at almost every store in California in the next 4 months talking about what I'm talking to you about. And I appreciate the open-mindedness of REI to bring us in and allow us to speak at a certain level about Bigfoot. And when the management took our idea into an executive level and asked them if they wanted us to come in and talk, the consensus was from the managers in the store that if the outside people, their customers, didn't come in and fill the room, they thought that the people that worked at REI would fill the room with their interest. So there's a lot of people out there that are on the periphery that may not know a lot about Bigfoot, but are highly interested. So we appreciate that by REI. Next. So next up, you're going to have Harvey Pratt talk to you about forensic sketching and how it combines with what we're trying to do. Before I go, I've got some time for some questions. No questions? That's good. Yeah.
I've got a question about the elevation. Do you suppose that could be because there are people living in those elevations?
Question is, with elevations, could it be that there are fewer people living at those elevations? I don't think so. And the reason being is that as you travel through that area, people like to live either right at or right